Okay, welcome to another course in Planning Dirty. I'm excited today because we've got a guest, Alex Morel, who's head of planning for Epoch, Epoch Design, Epoch, and we've been Twitter friends for a little bit, and he wrote an amazing article last year that caught the internet on fire. You've actually written a number, but on Magpie Marketing, which is the rate of innovation is actually not going as fast as we thought it was, and we should stop chasing shiny toys. But he's come today and he's going to teach us about the art of questioning clients. I saw this presentation, I got a bit of a preview. It blew my mind. And so I'm really excited for you guys to learn from Alex and to have him on as kind of a guest lecturer here. Alex.
Awesome. Thank you, Julian. That's a high bar to live up to, it blowing your mind. I'll do my best to live up to it. Cool. So as Julian said, I head up the planning team at Epoch in Bristol. I've been in this role for around 5 or 6 years. And over the course of that time, I have noticed that I've been asked the same question, been asked for the same piece of advice 3 times. Once was from a planner, once was from a creative, and once from an account person. And each time I did my best to answer that. I did the best to answer that question. But if I'm really honest, I never felt that I truly nailed the answer. I never thought I really solved their problems. Until this year, where I think I've had a bit of a breakthrough. And the question that was asked to me was, how do I ask better questions of clients? And I think this comes from juniors who go to client meetings alongside a senior person from any department, and they see the senior challenge the clients. They see them test assumptions, interrogate their thinking, push, prod, probe. And the junior then thinks that they need to improve on this skill, that they need to be able to be better at interrogating a client. But the problem is there's very little resources, training, articles, advice out there how you do that. In fact, between each of my 3 times that I was questioned on this, I looked for advice on how to improve my answer, and I couldn't find it. So that's what this deck aims to solve. It aims to help anyone from any department really, but planners specifically, to improve their questioning of clients. Now, in my phone, I keep this whole list of quotes from lots of different people. Julian appears in there once or twice. And this one I love, which is from Shane Parrish, who runs Farnham Street, which is a great website, if you haven't heard of it. And he says that the quality of the answer that you get directly correlates to the quality of the question that you ask. Now, when I read this prompted a follow-up question or a follow-up thought, which is that if we accept this to be true, then we must seek to ask better questions. We must try to understand how we ask better questions. Now, as I say, I had this breakthrough earlier this year, which is that all 3 times I'd answered this question, I was trying to answer, what does a better question look like? But I think the breakthrough is that how we ask a question is as important as what question we ask. Now, kind of implicit in that is the acknowledgement that there are more than one type of question, that different questions elicit slightly different answers and slightly different information, and that maybe we could use that knowledge to kind of form a bit of a structure for the types of questions that we ask at different points. And that brings me neatly onto the framework, which is that when questioning a client, we can break up that questioning, that interrogation, up into 3 distinct phases. Each of these phases has a different objective. It has a different mindset that we can adopt. It has a different questioning technique. And combined, these 3 phases really move the conversation from very broad and open and exploratory in phase 1 through to very narrow and direct and concrete in phase 3. Phase 1 is all about helping a client explore a problem. Phase 2 then, once you've gone through that phase 1, you move into phase 2, and that really is focused around nailing down some specific details, getting something solid for you to work with. Then once you've completed that, you can move into phase 3, which is all around framing a direction, framing next steps, starting to build a bit of a story about how we may go about solving this. It's not about solving the problem there and then, but about starting to indicate how we might go about that. The rest of the presentation really breaks down into a chapter for each of these phases, and then we'll come back to a bit of a summary at the end. So phase 1, exploring the problem. Now, I think a bit of a maxim that I hold and I use with my team is that you are always a strategist and never a salesman. That from the moment you meet a client, from the moment you shake their hand, or maybe not at the moment, you should act as a strategist. And I think a common mistake that we make, and agency people in general, not just planners, but agency people in general, a common mistake that is made is that we are too eager to get to the sales bit of the job, the kind of conversion bit of the job. We revert to case studies or show reels, or we sell in our bespoke methodology. We talk about our workshops that we can run, things like that. And I think at this phase in the conversation, I would just say stop. I would say focus entirely on your client and not yourself. Stop thinking about you as an agency and what you can offer, and start thinking about your clients, their challenges, their brand's challenges, and how we might be able to kind of formalize those a bit. So this first phase is all about helping your client explore the problem. Now, when I started digging into this, I began researching different professions and how they use questioning. I'm very fortunate in that my brother is a barrister and my sister is a police officer. So I have 2 very accessible professions, which both rely quite heavily on questioning. So you will, as I run through this presentation, you will notice a bit of a legal, judicial theme forming. So in this first phase, when we're helping a client explore the problem, the mindset that I try and adopt, or I encourage you to adopt, is one of a hostage negotiator. Now, that may seem surprising or unexpected, and I think if it does feel unexpected, it's probably because there are a number of misconceptions around how negotiators work. I think Hollywood has kind of trained us to think of them as tough, direct, provocative, challenging, confrontational. But that is really the opposite to how hostage negotiators act. They are trained to, rather than try and pull their opposition over to their side, they are trained to go to their opposition's side, to put themselves in their shoes, and once they are there, to then work together with their opposition to navigate their way out of the situation. So FBI negotiators particularly talk about tactical empathy, which is this use of really trying to forget your own position, your own goals, and trying to put yourself in the opposition's shoes to understand them and how they got to the position that they are in. and only then to try and start working with them to work out of their situation. Now, the questions that they use tend to be very open-ended. They don't have direct or concrete answers. They encourage quite long, almost rambling answers. Those answers tend to be a bit more thoughtful, and they tend to encourage an amount of introspection. You're not simply providing information, you're kind of exploring the information. You see this very much in therapists and how therapists ask questions as well. So for us, these questions may be things like, how has your brand performed over the last 12 months? Or what are the challenges your brand faces? Or what do we know about the target audience? They're very open, wide. They encourage this exploration of an answer. But it doesn't stop at that question. It continues on to how you act when that question is being answered. So hostage negotiators are trained in active listening. Now, during most conversations, most people are not really listening to their opposition, their counterparts. They're really thinking about what they will say next. And you can catch yourself doing this at times. I find myself doing this at times. Active listening encourages the opposite, encourages you to focus all of your attention on the person that you're conversing with. To not really think about your own position, your own answer, but to give yourself undividedly to the answerer. And hostage negotiators use 5 techniques to maintain this attention and also to signal that attention to their opposition. The first of those techniques is called minimal encouragers. That's when somebody is answering the question and the questioner says things like, okay, yes, I see, interesting. Sometimes it's even just, that kind of thing. They're just small little verbal tics that communicate you are listening, you are understanding, you are engaged. Lots of people do this without even thinking about it, by the way. Some people don't do it so much. The second technique is paraphrasing, and this is because open-ended questions can encourage quite long answers, and they can encourage quite rambling answers. Sometimes there is a need to kind of summarize what's been said, to kind of show that you've understood the rambling answer by kind of saying it in a very succinct way. And quite often you'll hear questions phrased like, just to make sure I understand where you're going, X, Y, Z. And that gives you a chance to demonstrate that you've been listening. And it also offers your client or a criminal, in the case of a hostage negotiator, the chance to correct you. Third is mirroring. This is a very classic one that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And this is just to repeat words, to repeat salient words. Negotiators kind of try and limit to 3 per kind of main point. Sometimes it's the last 3 words, sometimes it's just 3 important words throughout. Number 4 is effective pauses. It's almost human nature to try and fill a silence. Silences feel uncomfortable. They're kind of not supposed to happen in conversation. Now, as a negotiator, you can use that to your advantage. If you feel a counterpart hasn't given everything, hasn't finished the answer or has more to say, you can just maintain your silence. And your counterpart will feel obliged to fill that silence by continuing, by expanding. So sometimes just saying nothing, maintaining concentration, maintaining eye contact and attention, but allowing your counterpart to continue. And the 5th one, and if I'm honest, this is one that I kind of struggle with a little bit, personally, but it's called emotional labeling. Now, this is where you try and formalize how you feel your counterpart feels. So this often sounds like, or it feels like you're frustrated, or it feels like you're dejected, those kinds of things. Now again, it may not be right, but it demonstrates that you're aware of not only what your counterpart is saying, but the kind of tone that surrounds it. And it offers your counterpart an opportunity to correct you. Now, to close this, this first phase, we have the objective of helping a client explore a problem. We have the mindset of a negotiator. We have open-ended questions paired with active listening. And I'll just close it with a quote from Chris Voss, who's an ex-FBI hostage negotiator. And he says that research has proven that when someone feels they are being listened to, they listen to themselves more carefully. So part of the role of this phase is to encourage your clients to listen to themselves and to cause them to question whether they really have a handle on the problem at hand, or whether they've skirted over some issues. So that's phase one. Phase two is then clarifying the details. We've had this open, expansive, at times rambling exploration of the problem. We now need to lock down some details. I think one of the challenges of phase one is that in natural conversation, people will skip over a subject. They'll kind of start, and then their brain gets ahead of themselves and they skip over something. Or they will begin a sentence and then go off in a different direction. It's a very natural thing to do. It's why if you read a transcript of spoken word, it often feels disjointed. Phase two really offers us the chance to go back along the timeline of phase one and to tie up some loose ends, to ask some specific questions that fill in the gaps, that elicit some really concrete detail. Here, the mindset is that of a police interrogator. So if, like me, you have a interest in true crime and documentaries, you will notice that often police interviews begin with a statement. Sometimes they're written, sometimes they're read by a legal counsel, sometimes they're spoken and ad hoc, but they tend to start with a kind of open-ended phase. The job of the police officers is to turn that sort of anecdotal, free-flowing account into a set of facts. And they try to do this because each fact that they garner can then be systematically proven or disproven. Each of those facts becomes a sort of line of inquiry. And that's really the mindset that we'll adopt for phase two. The questions here tend to be very closed. They tend to provoke quite short answers, very concrete, direct answers. As I say, answers that can be proven or disproven. So for us and our questioning of our clients, these might be things like, you mentioned new competitors. What are they exactly? You want to increase penetration. What does that look like at the moment? And you'll see with each of these examples, the question style sort of breaks down into two halves. The first half is bringing attention back to a previous part of the conversation, a part of the conversation that may have been glossed over or kind of cut short. And then it finishes with a very direct question. So you mention new competitors. Who are they? All these questions in phase two tend to have that kind of structure. Again, it's not just about the question, but about your thinking behind it, or your technique behind it. And when I spoke to police officers about how they are trained to ask questions in interview, they spoke about a technique that's known as boxing. Now, what officers will do is they will take the statement of a suspect and they will draw a box around any keywords that they wish to ask further questions on. So if we take the example of a statement that is, we drove to the supermarket on Saturday. That's a 7-word statement. That's much shorter than most actual statements would be. But even then, a police officer could draw a box around 4 words. They could draw a box around we. And that would prompt further questions such as, who are you with? Who is we? What's your relationship? How long have you known them for? You could draw a box around drove. Who was driving? What was the car? What was the colour? What's the make and model? What was the registration plate? Who owns the car? You could draw a box around supermarket. Which store was it? What location? Was it extra or was it an express? And so on and so forth. So that kind of 7-word statement can quite quickly lead to 10, 15, 20 follow-up questions. And those follow-up questions are always closed. They're always direct. We can use a similar technique. We often are given a written brief, be that a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, or a kind of Word document. We can run through that brief and box the words that we want to ask more questions on. Box the jargon, box the acronyms that we don't understand, box the assumptions, anything that we want to dig into a bit more. Now, as part of my research in this area, I came across some interviewing guidelines from the Department of Justice in the UK, who were working in collaboration with the Crown Prosecution Service. And they pulled out this quote, which is, having elicited an account from the witness during the free narrative phase of the interview, and that's broadly phase 1 in my structure, the interviewer should divide it into manageable topics that are introduced and systematically probed. So this is a far more structured phase of the questioning than phase 1. So by now we have explored the problem with our clients. We have clarified any details that went glossed over or unfinished. Phase 3, towards the end of our questioning, is where we have the opportunity to start forming some hunches, to start forming some hypothesis of where we might go with this, what we might need to find out, what we might need to, the activity we might need to do in order to start unpicking these problems. So the objective here is really to frame the direction, to frame those next steps, to start controlling the narrative of this project, to start building out a potential set of steps that will end up with this problem being solved. Here, the mindset is one of a criminal barrister, so continuing our legal theme. In court, barristers ask questions of 2 sets of witnesses. You have, when you question your own witnesses, and this is known as direct examination, and you have questioning of your opposition's witnesses, and this is known as cross-examination. And it's the latter that I'm going to focus on here. In cross-examination, you are questioning your opposition's witness. Now, they have been called to the stand because they support your opposition's case and they challenge your own case. And because of that, they are a threat to your case. You do not know what they are going to say. You do not know the information that they have. And because of that, a barrister needs to control the story. They need to control the message. They need to limit the scope of what this witness will say. And they do this for the jury, of course. Now, they do that through the type of questions they ask, again. And they primarily use leading questions. Leading questions are questions that contain the answer. For us, when we're questioning clients, this may be things like, the aim is to grow the category, isn't it? It's kind of the hunch and then asking for confirmation. So we are targeting light buyers, aren't we? We need to change quality perceptions, don't we? Still phrased as a question, it still offers your client an opportunity to agree, disagree, to form alignment between the two of you. But it's starting to take control of a direction forward. Now, barristers call this reverse testimony, or at least they informally refer to this as reverse testimony. The idea is that the barrister is actually giving the testimony, they're giving the fact, and they are asking their witness to confirm or deny it. So you will have noticed in those three question examples that I gave, they were all the fact and then a question. So a barrister, to use our driving to the supermarket example from phase 2, a barrister may say, "You were with your brother, weren't you? You drove your silver Ford Focus, didn't you? You visited Tesco Extra at 3 p.m, correct?" Again, all of these questions have a similar structure. They are all information or fact followed by a question. And from a legal point of view in court, a barrister has to phrase their questions as questions. So this is a way to kind of feed in the story, the narrative, the hunch, whilst phrasing it as a question. Again, we can do this with our clients to kind of signal that way forward, to lay that hunch out there and form alignment between strategist and client. And in legal circles, there is this sort of mantra, which is during cross-examination, you should never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. So you may know something, you may be very sure of it, but by using reverse testimony and the technique of leading questions, you can lay that out there, you can make that public, and you can get agreement around that direction, that piece of knowledge. So that brings us to the end of phase 3. So to wrap up, I've tried to distill everything down onto one page. Now, hopefully it's not too cluttered. So to summarize, we have 3 phases of questioning that lead a client from a very broad and open discussion to a very narrow, direct and concrete discussion. Phase 1 is all about exploring the problem, using the mindset of a negotiator. This uses open questions, which elicit long answers, and uses the technique of active listening whilst we do it. Excuse me. Phase 2 is about clarifying the details, tying up loose ends, getting some specifics. Here we use the police interrogator, we use closed questions with short answers, and we deploy the technique of boxing. Phase 3 is about framing a direction forward. We use the technique of the criminal barrister, particularly in cross-examination. We use leading questions, which tend to elicit yes-no answers. And we use the technique of reverse testimony. As you can see from our diagram in the background, this leads from very open, wide, exploratory discussion and ends with a very clear and narrow direction forward. And that is where I'm at. Thank you.
I love this, Alex. Thank you so much for this. I think as I said at the start, the first time, I've never been taught this about questioning before. It's always something I'm nervous about like trying to give other strategists advice. And this is something I just haven't seen before. So I really appreciate you doing this. And we're going to get you into the Facebook community to answer some questions.
Sure.
Where anyone can ask questions. But the one question I wanted to ask you was, there is so much here. As a junior strategist, what would be the one technique that you think you should try to adopt first if you've got to start questioning clients tomorrow?
Yeah, of course. So if I jump back to the summary just temporarily, we have the 3 phases. And I think this presentation sort of frames them as equal weighting. I don't think that's quite the case. For me, phase 1 is the most important. The exploring the problem, allowing a client to kind of talk at you for a bit, whilst you really hone in on what they're saying. Then I think phase 2 is our second priority, which is then starting to lock down those details and getting something concrete. And then phase 3 is I think the least priority, because the direction can come after if necessary. So if I was a junior, I would really put my focus into phase 1 of forming those very open questions, really paying attention to the long answers, using your minimal encouragers, your paraphrasing, your repetition, your mirroring, to encourage them just to keep talking at you. Because you will gradually get a feel for where your client's head is at. And that, I think, is more important, at least in the initial briefing, than the other phases, because you can follow up with questions around specifics. You can follow up with a presentation of a direction or a proposal for a next step. But it's that phase 1 when you're in a room with a client or on a video call with a client, where that's very hard to recapture at a later state. So as a junior, I would think like a hostage negotiator and work on your open questions and your active listening.
I love that. Thank you so much, Alex. That was
No worries.
excellent, super informative for us. All right.